and the statistics that we should be able to use to lead and guide us. We're thankful for the opportunity that's been given to us. Pray that we'll be mindful of the needs of every person that lives in our community, and that we'll be able to provide a good place for families to grow and people to live. And we do it in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Would the city clerk please conduct a roll call?
Yes, Your Honor. Councilman Lance Godey.
Here.
Councilman Tim Hancock.
Here.
Councilman Mike Bailey.
Here.
Councilman Kyle Larson.
Here.
Mayor John Baker.
I'm present. I'd entertain a motion to excuse council members Peterson and Schatza from this evening's meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any opposed? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. I declare that we do have a quorum. The chair would entertain a motion for the approval of the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved. First item on the agenda this evening is the applicant tracking presentation. City clerk's report, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for the opportunity to visit with you tonight about our applicant tracking software. Before I get into the new software, I'd just like to go over a little bit of our past practices and how we've tracked applications. So just since October of last year, 2017, staff and hiring managers have processed 234 paper applications. That was for 18 different positions that were advertised. Well, 18 different advertisements, 13 different positions. We have received as few as 3 applications at a time and as many as 36. And so needless to say, that many applications creates a record-keeping nightmare. So I have boxes of records of applications. I'm required to keep them for the calendar year plus 3 years. So we have boxes of applications that we have to keep. And when an applicant calls and says, hey, I turned in an application a few months ago or maybe even last year, can you just pull that for me? I say, actually, I think you just need to file a new application because it would take a while to go back through boxes. So I'd just like to go quickly over how the applicant process has worked in the past. So the first thing, of course, is the vacant position. The position is either vacated by a current employee or the position comes open somehow. Before the position is advertised, we obtain approval from the city administrator and, of course, the department head of that department. Once the approval is obtained, then we open the position and advertise. And what that entails, the advertisement, we automatically advertise to 4 different locations: our website, Facebook, the newspaper, and to the Workforce Center. And then to open the position, we create a new job announcement. If it has been a position that has been advertised recently, then we can just go ahead and just recreate it, just change the dates and the salary. If it's something that we haven't advertised for a while, or we know that the job description has changed or could potentially change, then we have to work with the department head or the hiring supervisor and make sure that we have the right information on that. So the advertising process takes anywhere from 4 days to 2 weeks. Statutorily required to advertise for 4 days, and we found that advertising for 2 weeks, we get a better turnout of applicants. So once the 4 days to 2 weeks goes by, we close the position, and at that time we make a list of all the applicants that we have received. So we create a couple of different spreadsheets. The first is just a spreadsheet to show all the applicants that have applied and their qualifications based on the job announcement. And then we also create a ranking spreadsheet so that when the supervisors are reviewing the applications, they're all reviewing it based on the same criteria, and that criteria is taken directly from the job description. The applicant review is done by an HR member, an HR staff member, and then normally two hiring supervisors or the department head, and that process takes about a week. At that point, after all the applications have been reviewed, the people who reviewed the applications have just a quick meeting and discuss their rankings and see who has the highest rankings and if their rankings match. And at that point, we decide who we should schedule for an interview. So we usually interview between 3 and 7 applicants, depending on how many qualified applicants we receive. And that entails making personal phone calls to each one of them and trying to work around their schedule and our schedule to make an interview fit into their day. The interview review process then is done after all of the interviews have been conducted. We rank the interviewees based on their answers to the interview and how well we feel that they would fit into the position that they're applying for. And that takes about another week. At that point, we send out, if we decide that we want to hire somebody, we do an offer letter, and it's contingent, of course, upon a background check and a drug and alcohol check. And then if the person accepts, then we send written notification to all of the applicants. So it's separate letters to each one of them, and it's separate letters depending on where they were at in the applicant process. So then, of course, pre-employment drug and alcohol screening is done, and then the new hire orientation can begin. And that will be a different presentation as we move on through our NeoGov implementation. This just now is our applicant tracking. I just wanted to give you a quick overview. It usually takes between 4 to 6 weeks from start to finish to get someone hired. And that's, of course, dependent on if they then have to give a 2-week notice at their current employment. So it does take a little bit of time to get through the process. But thanks to the approved capital project of NeoGov, there is light at the end of the tunnel. So the NeoGov system will be able to offer better efficiencies. Our process will speed up much faster, better communication with both the applicants and the hiring managers. And then we also get a very professional appearance on our website. So the advanced screening portion of it, of the software, as the applicants apply and there's certain requirements on the job, excuse me, certain requirements of the job. If they answer yes or no or have different answers to some of the questions, it will automatically put them in a ranking for us, so we won't have to do that. So for instance, if we require certain education requirements or if we require a certain certification or a certain type of driver's license, their answers to these questions will determine how they are ranked in our system. Currently, our website is used more for an informational tool to inform the public of what positions we have open. We don't have the ability to apply online. The person who is looking for a job would just go to our website, see that there's a vacancy, print an application, fill it out, and then bring it in. There's no way to do it online. With the new software, we will be able to do that. Everything will be online, which will be very, very nice. So our new page will look like this. Right now it says we don't have any jobs at this time, and it's just because we haven't built them out there yet. But the prospective employee will be able to view the job announcement. We'll also include the job description of that job announcement, the benefits that the city offers, and they'll ultimately be able to apply online. So they won't necessarily sign on to the city's website. It'll be a NeoGov sign-on that will be specific to any NeoGov application with any organization. So the state of Wyoming uses NeoGov. There's other cities and towns around the state of Wyoming that also uses it. And the benefit of that is it saves their information and they don't have to regenerate an application every single time they want to apply with us. So we're able to accept the online job applications. We're able to configure job application templates so we can have different questions specific to the job that we're asking people to apply for. For instance, like our police department, we ask if they're post-certified or not. And so that is something that we can, not all of our applicants would require that question, but we could tailor it to each individual department. And then we're able to ask supplemental questions as well. So the applicant tracking portion of this for the HR staff and, of course, then the hiring managers, they will be able to keep track of the applicant as they move through the process and see where they rank. The applicant will then, instead of calling in and checking on their application and wanting to know the status, they'll be able to log on to their site and look at where they're at in the process. There'll be many options for reports and dashboards. I don't know all of the reports yet. That says that they have 90 different reporting standard reports, but the ones that I will use a lot would, of course, be the equal employment opportunity reports, the cost of hiring, the time to hire, so on and so forth, see how we can do better. And then our eligible list and online referrals. So if a applicant applies to a position that they are maybe not 100% qualified for, but we do have a position later on that opens up that their qualifications fit to a T, we're able to refer them to that position and they can submit their application based on that. So it'll be a bit of a good tool to use back and forth with applicants and getting people to apply with the city. So the next steps is we have our implementation specialist review scheduled for next week. And then after that, if they like everything and don't have any changes, then we'll create our hiring manager accesses, and then we'll get to go live. And I might be as excited as that little girl. So does anyone have any questions about the software or processes?
Mike?
So you said they're going to have a separate website that they would go to, or is it just a link from our site to the Riverton site to that?
It'll just be embedded into our website. So when you click on job opportunities, it'll go directly to that splash page. And it'll be a NeoGov page, but it'll be our page.
Labeled City of Riverton?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
So then all of these, you won't have any paper records. Is that correct?
That's correct. Everything will be
And so
electronic.
the applicant will apply online, fill out the application, then how do they send you letters of recommendation, fax them?
They can actually attach them, scan them and attach them as a separate document onto
Okay,
their
okay.
application.
Okay.
Are we going to make like a computer available if somebody wanted to come here and do that? As opposed to if they didn't have one of their own, let's say, or
I don't know that we will.
just one, or?
I think we'll wait and see what the need is. I know the Workforce Center does have computers as well as the library, and that's where a lot of people do their applications from at this time.
There's a computer in my office that would be available. Okay, I'd be glad to sit out in the hall while they did it. Go ahead.
Whereabouts are you going to hang on the home departments? I want to contact us, search. Where is this job going to, where are you going to put that? On the page.
It'll be under, I want to apply for a job. And so it'll go, that's where it,
I want to.
I want to apply for a job. Yep. Or you can go to Human Resources, and that's where the job opportunities are right now.
Okay.
So you're ready to start pushing the data into this and start putting some jobs on the board?
We are. We just have to wait for that final approval from the specialist to make sure that I didn't miss something along the way. And as soon as I get that from him next week, then we'll be able to go
Okay,
live.
great.
How many different job positions do we have in the city? Not how many people, I guess. So you're going to have to sit down and build every one of these jobs, or the supervisors are. So do you know how many of those there are?
We have 25 grades on our pay scale, and that's what I'm working off of, is each individual job within the pay scale. That's another thing I forgot to mention, is that when you build they call it a class specification. When you build it in there, it's the job title and then the pay scale that goes along with it. So I don't have to look up every single time and see. It's just automatically it does it for me. So there's 25 different grades, and within that, I think there's probably, I would say, at least 50 different job titles, job descriptions that we'll have to put in there. I started doing all of them. I think I have about 15 in right now. And then after talking to our implementation specialist, we decided that it would be better just to put those in as we have the need, as we have the job open. That way we're not having to go back and change, update any information. We can just create it live right there.
So, right, so you're not going to have to build all 50 times 25.
Right.
You're going to go in, okay, we need a dump truck driver. You'll build the dump truck driver one and go as you go.
Right.
Okay.
And the other benefit to the advertisement process is that it just takes one click of a button. So I can click the email. After I create the job, I can click email, and I can email it off to the Workforce Center. I can click Facebook, and it'll automatically link to our Facebook page. And every job that we have is automatically posted to governmentjobs.com.
Tim?
Some of this that I think would be exciting for you is the ability to have it eliminate applicants right away. I mean, if they're answering, if the job description says you must have a driver's license, and they answer, no, I don't have a driver's license, then you're not wasting time reading through the whole application
Right.
to see where they answer if they have a driver's license.
Right.
Or maybe they don't even answer it in the application. So it seems like that's pretty handy, and I know sometimes, I've seen job descriptions that say like serious inquiries only or whatever, because sometimes people are on unemployment and they have to turn in so many job applications in order to maintain that. So it seems like that's pretty handy then.
Yes, it is. And there's also, so it'll automatically do all that for us, rank them, and decide if they fit the position or not. But if somebody, for instance, does forget to check the button, yes, I have a driver's license, but then later on you can see that they answered that they have a driver's license, we have the ability to change their answer for them and rank them higher. So even if there's a mistake, it's not like they're automatically, like, you're out, we're not even going to look at it. We have the ability to still review that.
Lance?
Your Honor, having worked at the college both in the old days when there was plenty of paper applications and being on screening committees, we've transitioned over to something similar to this, different product, of course, but as a supervisor, it is immensely satisfying and extremely efficient to use systems like this. It's just going to be, I think, from employees all the way to the top, it's just going to be like the light at the end of the tunnel with your hands up, and I can imagine you are just going to be so excited when it goes live, because it will improve the efficiency significantly in all departments in hiring. So I think it's a great thing.
Thanks, Kristen.
Thank you.
Terrific. The next item is dashboard update, City Administrator.
Thank you, Your Honor. One of the things that we've been working on, and I know as council has seen at different times, are our dashboards. Kristen has a number of different presentations tonight, and I wanted to give her just a minute, but it also gave me the opportunity to go over a couple of these. Some of these we've been developing. We developed them previously, and we want to keep working on those. So as we go through these, I would encourage council, if you have any feedback in terms of what you would like to see. We can measure darn near anything. We want to make sure that these are useful for you and useful for the public as well. So when they are provided, that we can see what we're doing in compared to previous years. But do keep in mind, there are certain things that these sheets don't tell. When we get to emplanements, you can say, okay, well, obviously this line is here, or this is compared to this. Well, there's a lot of factors that go into each of these items, influent versus effluent. Obviously, we use water in that process, so we commonly get asked, how can you have more going out than came in? Well, because we add water to it. Some of those types of items. So as we go through, if there's any of these items that you would like to see, if there's anything over the coming months, years, that you would like to see, those are things that we can provide, and those are always useful for us. So with that, I'd just get into it. I did send an updated set to council if everybody has that. My apologies, I failed to update a couple of the sheets, and that's on me. But the major items didn't change, especially the item that I'll spend the most time on, which is sales tax. Just going through the slides briefly, the solid waste collection, obviously these are all done with regard to tonnage. Compared to 2018, the last 3 months or this first quarter, we've actually had less solid waste collection. Doesn't mean that we're failing to collect it. It means that the availability of it, it's not going over the scales. So that could, again, lead to a number of assumptions on why we have that. However, different spending patterns, any number of different items could come into play there. Keeping in mind that in most of these, the far left blue is the current year. This 2018, 17 is orange, and 16 is gray. Yard waste collection is also down a little bit. At this time last year, we had 847 tons, and fiscal year to date. And this year we have 664 in this quarter. I know that isn't provided for you, but you can see the trends on how that tends to work. Wanted to provide that additional information. Recyclables, though, are up. At this point last year, we were at 28.6 tons, and now we're at 35 tons. So that is a little bit higher. So obviously, comparatively, recycling activity would seem that it was going up, or making its way into that stream.
That doesn't seem to match the scale. What am I missing? So the scale is 8 to 13, and you said how many tons?
Total for the last 3 months.
Oh, I see, quarterly.
I apologize.
Quarterly, okay.
Yes.
For the.
I'm providing a piece of information, just a little
That's
bit of
not on the
analysis.
dashboard.
No, it is not on the dashboard, which is why I wanted to point out. What I am going to do is compare the 3 months, being July, August, and September, what we have data for, compared to July, August, and September of last year, as just an addition to these items.
Okay,
And as an addition, if it's easier for council from this point on for us to add those numbers on each of the scales so that math can be done and that analysis can be done, that's easy enough.
Kyle?
It appears that 2016, we were collecting crazy, and yet we've dropped in 2017 and 2018 down to almost identical for the previous year.
Yes, Your Honor, that's the drop-off of locations went away at that point. That's the difference. So you could say access to that dropped off, and it didn't.
So the figures on 2016 represent drop-offs from exterior sources, which may or may not have been recyclable in Riverton.
Well, we had look, I think it was Smith's and City Hall had a place you could come and drop off your recyclables, and then it was hauled away, and that represents that.
Okay.
So yes, as you say, that people could have brought their stuff in and recycled it here. You'll notice that it drops off pretty abruptly in October of 2016,
Yep.
which would align with when those modifications were made.
Well, there's another thing that took place there. Solid Waste District reduced what they were accepting for recycling. So up to at one point, we were taking anything that was number 1 or number 2 plastic. And then they went to number 1 bottles and number 2 bottles only. And so then there was all of this clamshells, all this number 1 plastic that we had been recycling that wasn't recycled. And the same way with glass, they quit taking glass for recycling. And recycling weighs a lot. The glass was heavy. So then we didn't recycle glass. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on, obviously, wood chips and compost being sold. We will see that there was a jump in May and June of 18, and that came from YDOT. Is that correct? I'm sorry, 71 Construction, buying some of that material. However, in July, August, and September, we are a little high for this year. For the quarter, last year, we had 167.7 tons, and this year we're at 197. So that is up a little bit, which is positive. One of the things that we want to try to show through these is a little bit of the demand. So items such as water treatment, treated and delivered in terms of millions of gallons is shown. Year to date for the quarter in 18 was 297.3 million gallons. And to date this year, we've done 317.8 million gallons. So there's about a 20 million gallon difference in the comparative time frame. What drove that by chance?
Could be seasonality, less rain, more water in the yard.
So, as Public Works Director and I were talking about, is there's any number of items can drive the demand. It could be a lot of the seasonal differences, amount of rain, how dry it is, et cetera. All of those can play into those. It makes it a little more difficult. If we actually added multiple variables within it, we could probably paint a better picture, but now we get into tracking multiple data sources and trying to make it consistent.
And then this is actually water treated by the water treatment plant, correctly? It doesn't include well water.
Yeah, for this, but it does include.
It does include well water through the whole metric.
Okay.
So, as this part of the year.
But June, July, August, and September, that is water treatment plant. That's what makes the differences, is the ditch water that comes into the system.
You can answer.
Sorry.
No, you're okay.
Your Honor, that is correct. For those months, the water treatment plant is operating. We're getting the water from surface rights. After October and up through April, it's our well field running. But what you're measuring is the amount of water that's being delivered through our delivery system, whether wells or treatment plant.
Mm-hmm.
This, Your Honor,
Go ahead.
this is more consistent, though. If you look at it, all 3 years, they're within percentage points. And, I mean, it's tracking very nicely. It's comforting if I were, I'm not seeing a spike somewhere. And so, whereas the recycle, it just dropped out. But the treated water and delivery is nice pattern where we see the June, July, August upheaval from dry lawns, and wonderful. Okay. Thank you.
That might be the first time I've heard someone describe a graph as comforting.
Well, you like to see rises where you think it will be and drops where, I mean, how do you explain November and December? Why isn't it the same as June and July? Well, it would be if you were building a lake. It's still comforting.
Not disagreeing.
The next graph you have is similar, maybe not as comforting. However, Covering wastewater influent, obviously, that's everything going into the facility at any given time. Comparatively, we are down about right about 21 million gallons compared to this time last year. Again, multiple factors play into that. But overall, the change is similar. If I were to run a line, a trend line through this in multiple years, you'd probably see about the same trend line in the and it's going to behave about the same way every year. Some years are going to be a little higher than others, but the pattern is going to emerge. I believe you have attached the effluent one, which is similar. We did discuss briefly that sometimes the effluent is higher than the influent simply because we do use water to help move that process along. So we do inject something in, so there can be more in terms of volume going out than going in, plus then we get into biosolids and the like. So that can change a little bit. One of the next item that we have, and I would, if you have questions, I believe our Public Works Director can answer them in much better detail than I can due to his work with the airport. But emplanements this year are up from 1949 last year to 2016 this year. Obviously, there's been some changes. We've had an additional flight this year due to the good work of FAST and the airport and pretty much everybody associated with the work going on in the airport. So we do have a little bit of an increase there. Kyle, did you have anything you want to add to that, other than we are doing more flights? Are there any questions on emplanements?
Well, it does look like we're less this year than last year. Is that? See, if you look at 2017, there's, is that, well, in July, no. But in August, we have basically 700 emplanements in 2018, and we've got 775 in August of 2017.
Your Honor, I can help with that. We did see a spike last August because of the eclipse traffic. But when you look at the months, Mr. Tolstead is correct in that we're performing higher in September, significantly higher. July was relatively comparable, so that for that first quarter, those months are better, but August did get thrown off a little bit because of the eclipse traffic. Another variable for 2017 is, as you remember, there was a period in 2017 when Great Lakes and Denver Air Connection were flying both out of the airport and recording emplanements separately. Once Great Lakes fully pulled out of our market, we did see a little bit of a drop in emplanements just because of the seat capacity dropped. And the nice thing is that we're seeing Denver Air Connection slowly gain that market share that Great Lakes was taking.
I see. I can figure that. I can follow that now. Thank you. Anybody else? Mike?
Again, for Kyle, do you remember when Great Lakes quit? I can't remember what month that was or what year.
Your Honor, it would be September, I believe, September, October.
October 1st.
Thank you.
About a year ago then?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And so on this dashboard, we don't have anything for October, November, December for this year.
Right, but
Okay.
September's up over 17, and Great
Right,
Lakes was there, and Denver Air. So
Right.
that's impressive that Denver Air is doing better than the two together were.
Yes.
The very next item is the general aviation numbers. This is different than our commercial air numbers. At this point in the first quarter last year, we had done 1,385, and in 19 of this year, our number is at 1,006. Again, we'll draw attention to the August numbers. So the eclipse, as with many airports throughout the state, saw an increase in general aviation traffic at that time. However, we are trending down a little bit compared to the previous year. any number of items can play into that with general aviation airports. But we will continue to track that and just to try to get a better baseline.
Thank you. I do have a question on the general aviation numbers. Does that include like key lime freight planes that come in every day, or
Your Honor, I don't know if I have that question up.
are they commercial? And
This is tracking a lot of the private pilot usage. Whether or not the key lime cargo is in that, I'd have to verify
Okay.
the number.
thank you.
I believe medical flights are included. I'm trying to remember from the actual spreadsheet itself, but I believe those are included. We will check on the key lime and get that answer back to council.
Sorry.
Moving on, the next item that you have that runs silver, gold, and blue is, you guessed it, the police department. One of the things that we've been tracking right now has been calls for service. Calls for service is usually used within the police department to gauge comparative demand. What I'm finding with Riverton is that I don't know if this alone can actually gauge our demand. So as I'm doing the research, what we have here is that last year at this time, we had done 3,206 calls for service. That is not officer initiated. That is, you call the police department, officer shows up. So at this point, we had done 3,206. This year, we have done 2,881. The reason for that is honestly unknown. This does not take into account any time an officer is engaged in a call of any sort, or total number of contacts, or any of the other items that they do on a regular basis that aren't set up as an actual call. So what I believe we're going to be doing with this, and I was just spending some time with this, I think we're going to need to look at our uniform data, uniform crime reports, that we compare with other communities. That is a decent comparison in terms of volume, comparative volume per thousand. You can do a comparative volume per landmass, et cetera. There's different ways to analyze it. So what I'm going to be doing with this one is, instead of simply showing the number of calls for service, is to lean more towards giving more of a multifaceted approach, some additional data that I'm going to be putting together. So we didn't have that for this time, and I apologize. It was something that came about after we had put out packets and the discussion had occurred. If anybody had any questions about how we might do that or had any input, we would be happy to hear it. But that is going to require some more research on my part and working with the PD.
Lance?
Tony, you're suggesting like breaking down into categories or specific items, number of items, to be able to get down into the weeds of what these calls of service have been for, so that we can start looking at changes and trends? Is that what you're thinking?
Your Honor,
Go ahead.
that is in fact part of what I am suggesting, but only part of it. When just from a slightly higher 30,000 foot view, what I'm suggesting is that simply using the number of times our community calls and requests our service does not show demand, because our officers are engaged actively. So they see something happening, they go to it. We're trying to measure those, trying to keep a measure, keeping this plus the UCR data as you pointed out. So thefts or DUIs or the like, and trying to say, okay, here's where our activity is, here's where our enforcement has been, matters in this case, as it does in most cases. Mm-hmm. Police departments are just famous for their data. And by saying it takes one of our officers an average of, we'll say, 1 hour, I'm pulling numbers here, 1 hour to effect a stop, arrest, and any of the booking procedure for a DUI. Well, that shows demand and how much time that officer is pulled off the street and is not out doing other enforcement duties. And we can actually show demand and the demand on the time of the police department a little better, I believe, other than just this report. That would be the intent, is to try to just provide more information, so as we start making decisions, we can do that. It's a little easier on our side to look at the police department because of the amount of data that they tend to keep. They keep their UCR reports. Our system allows us to pull data more. We would then look to some of that same methodology in the other items that we do to try to say, okay, these things are a challenge. How do we address them? So we want to use the data that we're showing you today. We want to develop it in a way that it can be used effectively within our organization.
Lance?
I'm sorry to follow up. So I think this, I like where you're going, and this is really probably where the community is going to be really interested. I'm not sure they care about influent and effluent. We should and pay attention to those things, but the community is really going to care. And you know, you look at a trend line, one can make a generalization that calls for service have gone down for the last 3 months, therefore crime has gone down for the last 3 months. And you really have to get into the weeds to understand that that may not be what that means, so that we can better understand what a call for service means. And so I totally agree, and we definitely need to be more transparent with what a trend line means, so that we can help the community understand specifically what the police department is doing and how well they're doing it.
In Your Honor, I would agree with Councilman. Most of the public is not going to want to hear about the influent and the effluent. However, we do want to make sure the data is available for our decision-making. And you're right, there are the part that we will ask for input on is when we look at these items, there are many factors at play. We can't, of course, calculate all of them. You look at November, December, January, and February, they're low comparatively. Well, of course, a lot of that during the colder months, that's a pretty normal item. Comparing those months to each other becomes where we want to get, and those calls for service likely change depending on what they are. The old adage about cabin fever takes effect somewhere in January, February, and you have certain spikes that you wouldn't have during the summer. So that will allow us to modify our behavior a little bit.
Yeah, could I just point out that, you know, there's a rather negative crime analysis that makes its circuit on the internet about every 4 to 6 months, something that shows, you know, Riverton to be, you know, the major center of crime in the Rocky Mountain West. And, you know, we know that that isn't exactly correct, but it's the way that they've collected the data and lumped it together. And so it would be very interesting, I think, to kind of break that apart and drill down and compare Riverton on more distinct kinds of offenses across the board, so that we could see how we compare to other communities. I think this has a real impact on people who are thinking about moving to Riverton or relocating a business to Riverton when they look at that internet report that just keeps coming back around. I think it's about 3 years old now, but they don't update the report, they just recirculate the report. And so then it would be, I think, you know, beneficial to have that information available on the city's website, so that when people are doing research for a community, they can see that our crime statistics aren't quite that terrible.
Yes, Your Honor. We're actually, and that is another item that we're putting together right now as a comparison. That takes a little bit of time because we have to make sure that other communities are collecting certain data the same way we are, or the numbers don't really mean anything. I'm finding out that it takes a lot more time when you're trying to make sure that how Cheyenne, for instance, categorizes something is the same way that you do. Then trying to make sure that you can compare. If not, then we can point out, okay, here's the comparison, but do keep X in mind.
Well, that should be something that's taken care of in the uniform crime report, right?
For those categories, we hope yes. So, The next item that I would, is probably one of the more developed. We put together what amounts to a rudimentary econometrics model that allows us to attempt, I guess, to look, to estimate what the revenue should be in a given month and to then use that information to track our current progress. As it currently stands, you have two separate items. One with your sales tax report. One is sales tax and one is use tax. Those are broken out for us and they're provided for you. Currently, we've calculated the annual sales tax at $1.85 million. And the use tax is calculated at $230,000. That is the estimate that is provided within the budget for this year. And we built our budget around that. So accordingly, we take all of the collection percentages in the previous months, try to develop the trend and apply that trend moving forward. So after you get a few months, you're allowed to look at it and say, we should be this far through the year. In each of these months, we should have collected this percentage of dollars. In the case of use tax, in the case of sales tax right now, we are actually about $16,000 ahead. Of course, not the margin everybody wants, but it's a lot better than the alternative of having negative dollars. If we go to use tax, we have, we are $46 lower over the last 4 months than we were, estimated to be. So that's pretty close. $46 is probably the closest I've ever seen it. Compared to previous years, sales tax is actually up from 629 to 636. Now, so keeping in mind, at this point last year, even with the eclipse, this is where you were. So that's a better trend than, I mean, that's not a negative trend. Use tax is down a little bit, and we do see that inversion a little bit when you see sales tax up, use tax down. But overall, right now, we're in excess of, make sure I have the number right. We're in excess of we're about $16,200 to the good right now. For this estimate. We will continue to be tracking this. This goes out to council within your packets, but this is one of those items. So at the very end on the right, the last item on the bottom right is that number that everybody should kind of keep their eye on. In this case, it's noted in red. The purpose of that is simply to draw attention to the number and say, here's where you're at. Combine that number with the same number on the other page, and you get approximately where we're at based on our overall estimate. Questions? That was pretty brief.
Any?
Okay.
So I noticed the state's economic report says that sales tax collections for Fremont County are up 5% for the first quarter. So that kind of agrees, right?
This would agree, yes. We should have collected, I'd have to do all the math right now, but yes, I mean, that would stand to reason. This one is also has 4 months versus 3, and the reason for that is we get the numbers in early October. So when we can provide it, there's no point in just waiting. So we did put those in this one. So other ones, we were talking about 3 months. This is a 4-month time period. I misspoke earlier. The last couple items are tracked through largely through the clerk's office, and we're talking about catering permits, malt beverage permits, open container permits, and park reservations. Catering permits are down. At this point last year we had 15. This year we have 6. Malt beverage permits are down from 12 to 7 in comparative years. Open container permits are up, from at this point last year we had 1, and right now we have 4. And then finally, park reservations, though, have increased significantly. At this point last year, we had 40, and now we have 61. So that would seem to suggest that we are getting some more park usage. which is a positive thing. It's part of the Parks Committee has been working on that. And I know they've been trying to find new ways to use it. So we would love to see this number go up. How we are going to break that data out, maybe we can put something on the forums that say what kind of event, so we can start seeing that, those different items. With that, I have no additional items to provide you at this point. Oh, I have a note, though. GA traffic includes commercial cargo. It also includes all military, medical, and civilian fixed wing and helicopter landings. To your question, it should be noted that the report only includes landings observed while the airport is staffed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I have nothing else.
Thank you. The next item is liquor license suspension revocation appeal process discussion. City Clerk's report, please.
Thank you, Your Honor. Before you tonight is an item strictly for discussion at this point. Due to a couple of minor violations that have occurred recently, as well as previous discussions around renewal time of liquor licenses, I thought it would be appropriate to have the discussion. Currently, our code is one sentence long on revocation of a liquor license, and it does not offer very much clarity or transparency to either staff or the license holder. So before you tonight is a draft ordinance, and I only put it in ordinance form just for clarity, so it'd be easier to read and understand. And with the language provided, the violations or actions that could potentially result in a revocation or a suspension of a license is defined. A detailed violation chart with violations against city code as well as against statute, liquor license code. And then the third item that this language addresses is a due process for both the licensing authority and the licensee for any action taken. One thing that this does add, I am just going to read the code. It's one sentence long right now, and it's section 5.04.220, and it simply states, the violation of any provision of this chapter by a licensee under this article shall be sufficient cause for the revocation of this license. This does not offer very much clarity or very much process, I guess, on how this were to occur if there needed to be, if it needed to be addressed. Now, I would like to point out our liquor license holders are very responsible, and we have had very small violations and very minor violations. We got some information for the past 3 years, and there has only been one citation issued and one fine assessed to an employee for allowing a minor to frequent an establishment. There have been 6 instances of sales tax delinquencies from 2 separate licensees within the past 3 years, which have typically remedied themselves. And then the last is that we have had 2 instances of licensees not maintaining operational status without notifying the licensing authority. We usually find out when the liquor division is doing their random checks, and we find out that way that they're no longer in operation. So we did forward this language to our city attorney, Rick Sollers, and he did not have anything additional to add or to say. I would just like council's direction or discussion on if they think this is a valuable tool or not.
Thank you. Any questions for Kristen? Lance?
Your Honor, would this be the appropriate code to address training, like TIPS training? That right now, if I remember correctly, it's essentially a voluntary process that a vast majority of the licensees do follow. But again, under the spirit of just in case we don't have anything to fall back on with a one-line sentence, that just in case And I know with some of the changes in the prevention management organization, I'm a little concerned about TIPS training availability in the future. I'm just wondering if this would be a place for that or if it exists somewhere else.
To my knowledge, it does not exist in code. However, that's one of the provisions that council has required licensees to sign when they sign their application, their catering permit or their open container permit, that they are agreeing that they have offered TIPS trainings to their employees.
So right now I'm sorry, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
So right now, we just basically require it as part of the application process, but it doesn't exist if they choose not to do it. There's nothing that requires them to do it in code.
Right. No.
Okay.
Mike?
So in the future, if we had a liquor license holder that had a violation, who would it come before to decide whether they were going to revoke their license? The council?
Yes. The governing body is the licensing authority for all liquor licenses and permits, so it would go before you. And as the ordinance, I'm glad you pointed that out, as the draft ordinance, the language is written in section F2. It addresses notice of hearing before the governing body. Right now, the way it's written, it just says a hearing may be set before the governing body at their discretion. And it might be a good idea at this, if we're interested in putting this language through, is to define what violations would automatically be heard before the governing body, or if all violations will be heard before the governing body, or if we just want to say, there's a specific 2 or 3 that automatically get it and the rest of them will be at the council's discretion.
Right. So with a lot of these other types of issues, so I know we have an appeals board for, community development, for example, and then the city council is the appeal to that if they don't agree with that decision. I guess to me, it would make sense for us to, without the risk of creating another board to have to deal with, have some kind of a board of appeals that they would go to, and then if they had a problem, you could go to the Board of Appeals and they say, okay, you've had 2 violations of the rules, and you need to do X, Y, Z in the next, and not have any violations in the next 6 months, and then you'll be okay. But if not, we're going to suspend your license or revoke your license. And then they would need to appeal it to city council if they didn't feel like that was appropriate.
I see where you're going, but with the licensing, or the governing body being the licensing authority, we're the ones that make the decision. So the appeals process would then go to the district court if we revoked a license that they didn't agree with. And to revoke a license, we can't just do that. It has to be submitted by your attorney, and it goes before the district court to revoke a license. To suspend it, the council can do that and suspend it, like say you have so many days to get this paid, otherwise it's suspended indefinitely type of thing.
Well, and I guess that's where I was going with it, is that they need to have a process that they could remedy the situation and not just get their license pulled, so if it has to go to the court, maybe that takes care of that. Because there's a lot of value attached to those licenses, which, not that other things we do don't have value also, but not near as much as these do sometimes.
Sure. Your Honor.
Go ahead.
I mean, so that's one of the reasons for the hearing before the governing body is to, if we're notified of a violation, we also want to hear their side of it too. So if they have identified what the issue was and have already remedied it through policy, or have already just fixed the problem, whether it be an employee or a policy, then they can bring that as part of what they've done to fix the problem going forward.
Okay.
And I think that's some of what's in F2, is that it's the point of the hearing is to allow them the opportunity to offer corrections, what they're going to do to mitigate the violation, and then we can determine whether they should face restrictions or suspension of the liquor license. And then in penalties, that gives us the option to either issue a written warning and/or require a mitigation plan of the violation or order a fine and/or suspension.
Kyle?
Could you say again how many violations we've had in the last period?
So in the last 3 years, we've had 1 citation and fine issued for allowing a minor to frequent an establishment. We've had 6 instances of entities not paying sales tax in 3 years. And then we've had 2 instances of licensees not maintaining operational status, meaning they closed their doors and didn't tell anybody. And that's in a 3-year period, so it's not.
So we've had 1 violation of a minor being served.
Not being served, just allowed to be in the bar after 10 p.m.
Well, he wasn't in there to play ping pong.
Tim?
When's the last time we've done a sting operation, so to speak, where they've had an underage person go in and purchase alcohol?
Your Honor, I'm not quite sure the exact date, but I know they've been working on them recently.
Okay.
Those are pretty much,
Well,
yearly.
I know, but it feels like we had quite a few cases of that a couple of years back, and it was different establishments too, if I remember right. Just that I prosecuted.
I do believe you're correct. It does seem like the last time they had this, they were issued some citations for minors purchasing alcohol in the establishments.
That was longer than 3 years ago?
I think so. I don't know. I got my numbers from the court clerk, so.
Well, and the court clerk would be talking about it if it were prosecuted through the city. But I know that we've had some of these prosecuted through the county. I'd be curious to know those, because I know that we had some, I'm sure, sooner than 3 years ago. Or I'm really a bad judge of time, which may be true, more recently than 3 years ago. So I'd be curious. I think there were probably maybe even 4 or 5.
So I do have a question. Is the city involved in enforcing the collection of sales tax for other businesses other than liquor licenses?
Your Honor, not to my knowledge.
Not to my knowledge, yeah. Okay. So that's a state law, and there's a state agency that's already in existence to check on that and to make that work?
Yes, Your Honor. For a licensee to hold a license, it's the licensing authority gives them the privilege to hold the license. So if they don't pay their sales tax, we are notified by the Department of Revenue that their sales tax had not been paid. And by the time I'm notified, the licensee is past due by 3 months, and they have been notified 9 separate occasions by them. So when I pick up the phone to make the call that says I got notice that you're delinquent on your sales tax, I'm the 10th phone call that they've received.
Well, I guess it doesn't seem to me like the state is terribly concerned about it.
Especially when they're working the city to collect it.
You know, yeah. So then after they send out 9 letters of delinquency, instead of just saying, well, you can't do business anymore, then they call the city and say, well, pull their license for us.
And we're not required to pull their license, but they're not allowed to purchase any alcohol if their sales tax is delinquent.
And I can recall one situation here a couple of years ago where they were just going across the street and buying from another establishment in order to keep their supply going. And so then what were they penalized for that in any way? I don't think so.
I think there's some penalties if you don't pay your sales tax. But I don't know what they are.
Never gone there.
I don't do that.
Thank you, Mike. Being an upstanding citizen.
It's just a curious thing to me, okay, that we have this particular issue, and for liquor license, I mean, I've talked to a lot of merchants that seem to be anxious about getting their sales tax paid on time, and yet this seems to be a recurring problem with the liquor industry. And I don't understand it. It seems to me like you collect your sales tax and you put it in a sales tax pocket, and at the end of the month or quarter, depending on how much you've collected, you send it in.
Well, and, Your Honor,
Being logical.
when I was talking to the Department of Revenue, if anyone is delinquent in their sales tax, they only have to be delinquent by $2.50 or more for them to be considered delinquent. So we, of course, it's not information that they give out of how much they owe. We don't know that information. But if they're delinquent and they're unable to purchase alcohol legally, probably unable to sell it at that point too, if they haven't paid their sales tax or should be unable to sell it, that the licensing authority should have a say in that.
Okay.
We're the only one with a stick that we can hold over their head, because technically the state looks to us to revoke their license, not them doing it.
Because it's local.
It
Because
could,
it's a local authority.
well, and it could be that the state has to collect it civilly. Okay. Any other questions?
Where did we get, what you had here written, I think, 2 or 3 communities that we looked at for this? Where did these come from?
So I did research with Cheyenne, Laramie, and Douglas.
Douglas. I see. There's good things that come out of Douglas sometimes.
Lance?
Sometimes.
Your Honor. So, Kristen, you want to clarify whether or not the list of violations are or are not, should be a part of, or, that's not good English, whether you want them to be a part of the list of violations, and, or the number of, or like, is there, or are you recommending that this is the expansive list and they all should be equally weighted?
That's where I would like direction.
Okay, that's kind of what I got a feeling, is because some of these are perhaps a little bit lesser than others in, yes, they're violations, so it would be helpful to understand the weight, I guess, of each of these as to whether or not we want to include all of these equally, or perhaps group them in areas that are of lesser weight or more weight, or that might be a possibility, is grouping them to help us.
Yeah.
I guess I understand the hearing concept and would agree that it would provide more structure when a licensee comes forward for renewal or has to be addressed prior to renewal, to be given a hearing to provide an opportunity instead of waiting until the once-a-year renewal to then find out, now I'm in trouble. And also, I guess I wanted to double check on something. So it says in F2, upon receipt by the clerk of a notice from the state of Wyoming pursuant to Wyoming statute 122306, and/or such information from the municipal court. And I'm not sure if Wyoming statute chapter 122306 is expansive of all violations, so that if a circuit court violation or some other court violation would be found to be able to Because we're specifying municipal court violations, but I'm not sure we're specifying other court violations.
I think the information is meaning to be talking about what's in one. So it has one, municipal court shall report the following information to the city clerk. And then it's saying, so it's 122306, that's the sales tax. Then it's saying,
Okay.
and/or such information from the municipal court, that's referring to one. But I agree. I mean, if we're going to have these violations, for example, it makes no sense to have in number 5, well, let's see, number 2, which is just a state violation, if we're not going to have notice of it whatsoever,
Right.
because the circuit court isn't going to be providing that to us. I mean, we'd have to go out and ask for it.
Right.
And like I said, it's interesting, you're talking about these violations, whereas I know there had been more than that, and I'm pretty sure within the last 3 years through the circuit court.
Right, that's exactly what I was thinking, is that circuit court violations should count. Every violation against the license holder should have some weight of counting.
So maybe what would make more sense is, rather than this coming from just the municipal court or the state of Wyoming, that one of the sources of information would also be the police department. Once somebody has been charged with a violation of one of these statutes, they'd need to notify. Now then again, though, we'd have to wait for the conviction.
Right.
There has to be
But
a
at least,
conviction, not a,
but at least notify the clerk that a citation's been issued so that
We can follow up.
clerk's office can follow up.
And I mean,
is that legal?
is what legal?
If I get a speeding ticket, do you notify my insurance company, or when I'm convicted of speeding, do you notify my insurance company?
I'm just talking about a process by which we can get the information to us. I'm not saying
And I-
that we would act on it unless there were a conviction. I agree with you completely. But I'm saying if the police department charges somebody with a violation of one of these state statutes, we need to have some process by which we could see what happens in the court system. I mean, if they're found not guilty or something like that, then
And we already, I mean, their charges are in the police blotter every day with identifying information, and they're not convicted yet. I mean, they are innocent until proven guilty, so the burden still rests, but we don't have, unless Kristen's going to take the time to contact the other jurisdictional courts on a,
right. That's, I guess, my point, is just figuring out the way to get that information. So the point is two things. The wording there where it says information from the municipal court, that's a little confusing. So I think we'd want to consider a way to word that. You could even say information from the municipal court under F1. But then the second thing is I think there needs to be more sources of information for this than just the municipal court, because we're not getting the complete picture. And I can see someone like Cheyenne, this would work, because probably the Cheyenne Police Department, all of these convictions go through the municipal court. They've got a comparative ordinance, but where we don't for all of these.
but you still are asking, I guess, the question, how many of these or which ones count for, to qualify for a hearing?
Correct.
Yeah. That's the
I
unanswered
agree.
question.
There's some of these that, failing to post your license properly is probably not near as serious as
Yeah.
selling to underage minors.
Right.
So I think some of those could be removed from the list. Like the posting of the license, for example,
The state ought to be paying more attention.
yeah, that's
than-
sort of the state's problem. I mean, as long as we know they have one.
Yeah. Well, several years ago, we had we tried to meet with the Liquor Association here in town and to create a point system to try to evaluate how well various establishments were following the rules. And And I think for the most part, we were stonewalled on that. They would much rather, instead of having some objective criteria by which to be judged, they would much rather be judged on how they parted their hair, or whether or not their goatee was too long, or whatever criteria that the city council wanted to come up with. And they would much rather that we acted arbitrarily and capriciously to deny a liquor license than to actually have some standards by which they had to live.
And see, the thing is when we have a vague ordinance like we do now, we're not going to act on it. We're not going to require compliance with this because it's so vague that we're
Never sure when there's a violation. That's
Yep.
right. That's
And
right.
so I could see where that would be something that they would relish in. But I think doing this makes a lot more sense. It makes things a lot more transparent for everyone. But you're right. Vague ordinances, people like them sometimes because it means we're never going to enforce them.
Yeah, and so another thing that could be added to the list is selling to a habitually intoxicated individual.
It's on there, it's
It's on
highlighted.
number 19.
It's on there.
Is it? Oh, I see. Okay, pending. Okay, pending. Okay, pending passage of that
Right.
To a known.
to a known. That's right.
He's on the list,
It's on the list, yeah. Okay.
frequent flyer.
So what do you think, guys? We ready to see this as a ordinance and get ready for a room full?
Well,
And I guess, to me, the only suggestion I would have is on the list, we need to probably take out the ones that we wouldn't consider serious enough to restrict somebody's license. If somehow we could qualify these, for example, the failure to post your liquor license probably is not an offense that should be something you could try to restrict, remove their license for. But other than that, most of these things in here are violations of Riverton Municipal Code that we already have listed, so they're already in there.
If, Your Honor, maybe the idea of I'm just throwing this out, a minor violations section and a major violations section, because if there were multiple minor violations, that might be different than one single major violation. So we could still keep a full list of 20 things, but we're kind of designating which are take care of it and it's fine, versus you need to come explain this to us. It's not fine. Maybe.
Well, and I think I wouldn't have any problem suspending or revoking a license if we warned them 15 times, you need to put your liquor license on the wall, and they didn't do it.
Right.
So I think having it there is good, but I do think maybe if we could break it out into terms of minor violations, and we could even say repeated minor violations could result in suspension and/or revocation.
Right.
And major violations could result in suspension and/or revocation.
Right.
Maybe would be the way to do that. Split it out into two, then we're not kind of getting into too many points. It's just two different things.
Okay. And so, Christian, do you need help deciding which are minor and major?
No.
Your Honor, one other item that I think is worth council's consideration. As it's currently written, you may have a hearing. Having seen other verbiage like this in the past, it's the intent of when it was originally developed in other places has been, there are certain items, for instance, sales tax, that immediately once that we got notice from the state, that organization would automatically, you're getting a hearing in front of council. Just, that's what it is. Other ones, such as, you could pick any number of them, those would go to council and say, okay, they would have a recommendation from staff on the consent agenda. And then if council wanted to pull those off and have a hearing, they would direct staff to do so. Sometimes those are even selling to a minor and say, okay, well, they've gone to court, they've been convicted. Okay, that process is done. Do you want to have a hearing on it? Was it their first? And then those questions come up. Was it their first time? Was it their fifth? Was it and then we have those conversations. I believe the question is, are there those items here that you would want to have an automatic hearing on, where if X happens, it comes in front of council as a hearing, where we notice them and they're directed to appear and the like? Or do you want to do that in terms of providing that list to council and letting council decide on an ongoing basis? So you could pick one or two, or however many you choose. You could choose to have every single one of them come. That's not advised, but that would be something as far as conversation goes that is useful to staff, simply because some items, such as selling to a minor, we'll use the easy ones. There is no time constraint. They're convicted through the normal court process, and then it can be brought to council, and council can choose. Other items, like sales tax, you can look at another month turnaround before anything happens if we have to bring it to council and then bring it back. So maybe what I would suggest is a conversation or thought about how you would want that to work. Are there items that you would want to see an automatic hearing for?
Well, sales tax revocation, I don't feel that we need to.
It's not our job.
That's, I feel that Kristen she gets that, whoop, gives that 10th call or the 11th call because it's busy, and she facilitates that. We don't need to be bothered with what, oh, I forgot to pay my sales tax. Oh, my goodness. What can you say?
So part of the issue is the lag time between when a violation occurs and when we actually are going to pay attention to it and talk about revoking a license. So we're practically in a position where it'd almost be multiple violations before the council would ever move to revoke somebody's license. Having a hearing and revoking the license isn't the same thing, right?
And, Your Honor, we're probably talking suspension first, long before revocation, because revocation's a recommendation that then goes to the court, is what you were saying. So
Okay.
I would assume we've already had.
And so then if we talked about somebody that closed the doors and didn't bother to tell us, okay, they could come in and say, I'm going to temporarily suspend operations, I want to park my license. Is that something they have to bring to council to do?
Your Honor, yes, it is.
Okay. And so then they would have some period of time that they could do it, but like only for a year now, isn't that correct?
Correct.
And so that they didn't get the store opened and they didn't get it sold, that license would just disappear.
It's like First Interstate did.
Yeah.
So, yeah, First Interstate came and parked and got a license and parked it. So,
I think in terms of going through this, and maybe we need to do this on our own and shoot an email to Kristen or Tony or something, because, for example, if someone made a false statement on a liquor license, that'd be a big deal to me. If there's something that they're telling us something that's incorrect. Now, but that depends on what it is too, right? Mm-hmm. If they, don't include their middle initial and they're supposed to on the form, or put the wrong middle initial, that's one thing. It's another thing to say, they're
Have any
operating.
felonies that I really.
Yeah, and they do have
Yeah.
felonies, right? So making a false statement, for example, I could see that one leading to an automatic hearing, but we haven't dealt with that either.
Right.
Failure to post a liquor license or one-day liquor permit. Now, that one, I think we've already said we don't need to have a hearing for one instance of that. So I think maybe separating this out into the major and minor violations would be the best way to go. And then we could have in there specifically any more than one major violation. Because I think you're right. I think we could sit there and say just one, maybe no big deal. Depending, though, on what it is.
If he has one and it's an employee's been disciplined or terminated or whatever, he shows action to improve or to correct versus, well, what are you getting after me for? I mean, no repair, we had to show what we were going to do to correct the violation when we had a emission above the limits. Well, this is the same thing here. When you have a violation, what are you going to do to correct it? Because this is your livelihood. This is what you're making money with.
But I think that's assuming, we're not going to hear that unless there is a hearing. And I guess that's the point then. Do we want to have hearings on everything? Maybe major violations, we say any one of these, and you can expect to have a hearing. And then, I don't know. There's just a lot that goes into this. Selling to an intoxicated person, for example, if that happens, I think I'd want to know about it. I'd want to be like, hey, if it's an obviously intoxicated person.
Is that important to you?
It is to me, but I mean, it depends. We want to make sure what's.
Well, that's our problem with the habitual flyers. Knowingly selling to an intoxicated or to one who is constantly intoxicated. That's important. In fact, our constituents have told us that's important in no uncertain terms.
So I guess the way we could do it is just say, if there's an instance of a major violation, we want that to come before the council, and we want the council to decide whether we're going to have a hearing on it. Maybe we could have it in the consent agenda or something like that. We could decide to pull it if we want to do it, but we'd have to give notice. We can't just say it's in the consent agenda and have them here if we're not going to have a hearing. I don't want to have a liquor license holder sitting here and, waiting if we're going to decide if we're going to have a hearing that night. We need to make sure there's notice. And I think that's partly what's in here, is that we're saying there's got to be notice to them. So there's got to be a way that we decide if we're going to have a hearing, we send out the notice, and then they come here. But we need to have a way that the whole council is deciding if we're going to have a hearing, I think is the idea of this. Is this important enough that we're going to have a hearing? So I think that's where we separate it out and say major violations, we could list those out, and we could say if there's one instance of this or two instances of this, council will decide if there's a hearing. Minor violations, then there's something else.
Okay, the discussion has kind of come back around to me, okay, my thinking has made a 360-degree circle or something here. Okay, it seems to me that what we should say is that the council needs to be notified if there's any violation of liquor laws. Okay, and we're going to schedule a hearing. That'll be part of the next business meeting of the city council. So you've gone to the judge, well, maybe the employee has gone to the judge and paid the fine, but the guy that has the license needs to come and talk to us about it.
What's he going to do to correct it?
That's right. What are you going to do? How are you going to fix this? Okay? And if he can't, and if he says, well, I don't plan to fix it, then you say, well, that's okay. Just
We didn't plan on doing anything.
deliver your license over here to Kristen tomorrow.
But see, I think that's a good idea for the major violations, but if there's a minor infraction, I don't think maybe we do need to get notified of those.
See, there aren't very many. This isn't like we're going to spend the entire evening every Tuesday night talking about liquor violations, are we?
No.
No.
There's not that
Okay?
many of them.
One or two a year.
Well, and it does raise the seriousness of having one, because you're going to have to come before the council and
I think that's,
plead for forgiveness.
Those 20 are significant. If you habitually hide your license,
why would you do that?
I don't know. Why is it on there?
Does it interfere with the decor?
I'm not.
The feng shui?
I would suggest that we list these violations maybe send them to us with a place for us to say major, minor, whatever, and we could get a consensus on who thinks what's major and what's minor, like you had suggested.
Or we just get notified of them all.
Well, I'm not saying we
Decide
couldn't get
case by
notified, but
case.
I'm saying, I think the major ones would qualify that if they do have one and they do get convicted, that we want to have them stand before us and say what they've done to remedy the situation or whatever. I don't think that's out of line. And it's one more incentive for them to be more careful and not have major violations, which I think they already are, since we only have one or two every 3 years. I don't think it's and I just hope we're not creating a big, drawn-out system for a problem that doesn't really exist.
But if it ever
But
did,
if it ever does, this would be a good thing.
yes.
And we have the opportunity probably that with the new law we're working on, that we may have the occasion to have this tested.
Maybe what we do is just to start, we keep this with the violations like this, and then as time goes on, we can kind of fix it and adjust it and tweak it. You know, I don't know.
No.
Takes some-
No, we don't.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Should the Solutions Committee tell us what is?
We could certainly work on that.
We could look at the list, too.
I mean, if you want to charge us with that,
Well,
we work at,
what's important to me is not important to everybody else, but the Solution Committee has been tagged with doing that. And some people are saying, oh, well, the Solution Committee is not doing anything in there, you know. So have at it.
Your Honor, we have a meeting this week. This could still be on the agenda for a discussion,
Sure,
if that's council's preference.
that's fine.
we can come back with recommendations for minor and major.
Okay,
And I mean, it's better to have a recommendation from the Solutions Committee.
Yeah.
This is what we did. This is where we're going. Then we have a consensus here on city council, and voila.
And there, uniquely, there are 2 liquor license holders on the Solutions Committee. So I think it would, actually, as we've gotten 360 on this, is that it would be a great opportunity to get the input, help them understand, and, because I think ultimately they have been in support of the habitual drunkard ordinance because they were involved. So something like this happening, if seen it ahead of time, had an opportunity to discuss it, give input on it, would help.
I think the input's the important part.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the liquor license holders don't want to see bad actors either, because it makes them all look bad. So the 1 or 2 that are causing a problem, hypothetically, they don't want them either, so,
No, they're costing money.
yeah.
okay. So we've got a little bit of action here. We're going to take that to the Solutions Committee this week, and we'll hear about it down the trail. Anything else? I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded that we adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? 8:34.